in Ecclesiastes, and I don't have the workbooks that I made. I've already given out, so I don't know. I need to just set up a little concession stand, I guess, in the back and sell them as you come in or something like that. But if you need a workbook, please tell me and we'll get you one. But even if you don't have a workbook, I think you can follow along easily enough. Ecclesiastes lesson number 4, seeking life, finding death. We said we would not consider the book chapter by chapter or even verse by verse, but instead thematically. And this is a prominent theme in the book of Ecclesiastes, life and death. Seeking life, but finding death. Are you afraid to die? If we were all honest when asked that question, I think the probable response would be maybe a little. Clyde says no. Clyde's going to be brave. He said no. And that's the right answer. That's the truly right answer, Brother Clyde. Absolutely not. No. I know where I'm going, and it's not a problem at all. But maybe in the back of our minds, there's still a little bit. Maybe because of just the uncertainty of it all. Yep. Yep. There's a reward at the end. And God's took care of us, and we know He'll take care of us. That's right. And that attitude we're all striving to possess. You probably received the Light Post message, of course, about Amy's aunt passing away. She was 69, so a young 69, as we all approach that number, and some of you have already surpassed it. But for the last, I guess, 3 or 4 years, I don't know the exact down to the day amount of time, but at least for the last 3 or 4 years, she has been restricted in many of her activities because of a need for dialysis. And those of you that have had any experience with that, either personally or taking care of a family member or a loved one, you know what a challenge that is. And I don't know, just the few times that we got to visit with her and speak with her over the last 3 or 4 years, it just seemed like she didn't have a single good day, you know, a day where you really felt like you wanted to feel because of, again, the complications of the dialysis. But of course, thankfully, as Brother Clyde said, what makes the difference and what gives hope this morning, she trusted in the Lord and tried to live as God's Word teaches us to live. So, you know, something better now is hers to enjoy, free from that malady. And so, you know, that's something to rejoice in. Another, she's kind of a family member, but another lady in the community that lives within sight of Amy's aunt passed away yesterday. It's actually the case that Amy's brother, Kenneth, of course, they lost their sister. Her name was Linda, but Amy's uncle Kenneth, his wife Audrey, it's her sister that has passed away. And so it's just a really tough time for that family. But again, knowing Ruby was the name of the other lady, Ruby Anderson. She's a cousin of Amy's, but also tied in that way. You know, knowing that both of them now are better. Ruby had cancer and had fought it multiple times over the last couple of decades. And so, you know, are you afraid to die? It really comes home to us at times like these. And hopefully we can answer with certainty. Oh, no, I'm not afraid to die. Here just, I like to pick, of course, from history, different quotes and things that individuals have said and thought about and put to pen to paper to record for us. Mahatma Gandhi, you probably recognize his name, he said, "The fear of death is worse than death itself." It's hard to know. He was probably a Buddhist, at least some version of it. Now, I'm not endorsing his religious views at all, but I think he's speaking to something that's even perhaps true for the Christian. Sometimes the fear of death can be worse than death itself. If we're living for the Lord, there should not be any fear in death, as we've said already. Socrates, of course, the father of Greek philosophy, the father of philosophy in total, he said, "To fear death, my friends, is only to think ourselves wise without being wise, for it is to think that we know what we do not know." And that's just one of those philosophical statements that you kind of have to roll over in your mind a few times to really, you know, get down to what he was trying to express. To fear death, that's to think to be wise without being wise, for it is to think that we know what we do not know. It's not death that a man should fear, Marcus Aurelius said, the Roman statesman, military commander, but he should fear never beginning to live. That statement's been capitalized on and used in a number of variations through the centuries since he first spoke it, and that's true. Many people never really live because of a fear of death, because of something that they think might happen, and so they don't live life with the enthusiasm, maybe the gusto, the abundant life that Jesus spoke of in John chapter 10. But the best, I guess, statement on death and our reason to not fear it is found in Hebrews 2:14 and 15. Inasmuch then as the children have partaken of flesh and blood. That's us. That's what we are. We're finite, limited physical beings, of course. We have flesh and blood, but Jesus, He Himself, Jesus likewise shared in the same, that through death He might destroy him who had the power of death, that is, the devil, and release those who through fear of death were all their lifetime subject to bondage. Last week, the world looked at Sunday and whether they understood the significance of it or not. Maybe they just think of an Easter bunny and a ham and a family gathering. The idea that there is, something that happened where people have understood a man died, but he came to life again. The resurrection. And I think we should, of course, as we're able and have opportunity, capitalize on those times if people were to ask us or mention something to that effect. Yes, we believe Jesus died and rose again. He is risen indeed, and really everyone that's of interest to them. And we're going to continue, not this Sunday morning, but the Sunday mornings following, to really look at what that means because Jesus lives. What are the ramifications of that for our lives day by day? And so come back for that. That'll be kind of a little mini sermon series we'll do starting next Sunday morning. Well, let's think about what Ecclesiastes says this morning about seeking life and finding death. And I'll start, interestingly enough, in the New Testament, and you don't have to turn there because you know the story, I'm sure. Luke chapter 15, a certain man had 2 sons. And the younger son said to his father, "Father, give me the portion of goods that falls to me." And sure enough, the father was willing. He divided his goods among them, and not many days later, the younger son, gathered all he had, went to the far country. Wine, women, and song. Now, this is where the Allen version takes over instead of the actual quotation from Scripture. The summary, wine, women, and song. He lived high on the hog, enjoyed a good time. He found lots of people that went along with, "If you've got the money, honey, I've got the time." But sure enough, like most of us have experienced, maybe not to the same measure, the money ran out, and so did what? The friends and the fun and all of those other things. And he went from high on the hog to what? Feeding the hogs. From the pen house to the pig pen, he ends up in that state that would have been deplorable for a Jewish boy especially, because of the nature of the unclean animal, which the swine was. And yet, even in the muck and the filth, and I can probably say I don't know, some of you, I'm not going to call you a city slicker, that would be demeaning or denigrating, so I don't mean to do that, but a lot of us growing up in the country, you know that there's no smell like hog slop, right, Clyde? I mean, there's just no smell like hog slop. I remember getting to have that privilege of slopping hogs as a youngster and shelling corn and doing all of that sort of thing. So, in the midst of all the muck and the stink and the starving belly, the Bible says the boy came to himself. I just love that statement. And it's the self-realization, what am I doing here? What am I doing here? How many of my father's servants have bread enough and to spare? I will rise and go to my father and say, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I'm no more worthy to be called your son. Make me as one of your hired servants." And he arose and went. That's the best part of the story. He didn't just think what he should think or have the idea that things could be better or were back home. He actually got up and went back home. And of course, you remember when he was still a great way off, his father saw him, felt compassion for him, ran, fell on his shoulder. And the boy began his rehearsed story, but the dad didn't let him finish it. Now, I I love the story so much, I'm going to spend all my time unless I go very rapidly. Verse 24 and verse 32, here's the point that I was using by way of introduction for this class. When the father sends the servants to prepare and make everything ready, you remember, we're going to have a party. He said, "This my son was dead, but he's alive again. He was lost, but he was found." The party commences. The older son comes in from the field. He checks his schedule. "I don't remember Dad throwing a party today. That wasn't on the calendar." Calling one of the servants, "What happened? What's going on?" "Well, your brother's back." Well, he pouts. Dad comes out to try to get him to come in. And Dad says again, "It's right. This is the proper thing to do. Your brother's come back home. Don't you realize your brother was dead, but he's alive again?" Now, there's no reason, and I have no indication that any of us would think that the son, the first son, the younger son, was physically at any point dead and was in any way resurrected back to physical life. That's not the point at all. He was dead in his condition, separated from his father. He was dead because their relationship had been severed because of his foolishness and sin. He was dead in that sense, and only when he was back with his father, back where he was safe, back where he had a place and a purpose, could he be said to be alive again. And that sets the stage maybe then for what we're going to look at when we come to Ecclesiastes and see that the idea death can happen even while I'm alive. Ephesians chapter 2 says much the same thing in a much more abbreviated fashion. Paul writing to the Christians at Ephesus, and I want to point something out to you just so you'll be aware of it, and you probably are already. In Ephesians 2 verse 1, many of our versions will say, "You he made alive who were dead in trespasses and sins." Now, probably, not all, but at least a good many of us, notice that the words "he made alive" are italicized. They're kind of slanted there. Well, that indicates to you that the translators have supplied them. They were not in Paul's original letter. They are supplied to help it read more smoothly. What Paul really said in Ephesians 2 verse 1, "You were dead in trespasses and sins." That's how bad your condition is without God and outside of God, separated from Christ. You walked once according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, the spirit who now works in the sons of disobedience. You were dead. Not physically, not biologically, not clinically, but spiritually. You were dead in sin. Now, this I told you would be repeated in each class, so don't get weary of hearing it. The perspective of Ecclesiastes is simple. Life without God is meaningless. Now, I know many people will think that to be an unfair judgment or maybe an overstatement. And they'll want to add some sort of caveat or disclaimer and say, "Well, what you really mean is life without God is not as good as life with God." No, that's not what I mean. They'll say, "Well, what you really mean is life without God, you can still add some, contribution to life. You can make some positive difference, but, with God you could do even more." No, that's not really what I'm saying either. What I'm trying to say is what the writer of Ecclesiastes says, which is life without God is vanity, futile, inconsequential. And I know that seems to be very harsh. And if you were talking with individuals who say, "But, in my line of work, in my life I do this." And, you can insert into that blank whatever for this, a number of things that, I'm certainly appreciative of. I'm a public educator. I tip my hat to you. You're making a difference in an arena that a difference needs to be made in the lives of children. I'm a public servant, a police officer, a firefighter in EMS or one of those fields. I applaud you. I respect you. And I'm thankful that you're there if I were to need you in one of those situations where your skills are called for. I serve in our nation's military. Again, you have my greatest respect and honor, and I appreciate what you do for our nation. But at the end of the day, in the final analysis, what will make a difference, as someone has said, just kind of for hyperbole, what will make a difference in 1,000,000 years is only whether or not I've lived my life for God. That's the only thing that will matter then. So true life comes from a relationship with God. Is there hope without God? That's a question that many have sought to answer, and Ecclesiastes does as well. And hope is one of those essential commodities of life. You have to have it or you fall into despair. Wednesday night, we're talking about encouragement. And some of you are in this class, some of you are teaching. But on Wednesday nights in our class on encouragement, we've talked about that a person that lacks hope will often become discouraged, and that discouragement can turn into despondency and depression, and it can turn into some very, very serious health issues, mentally and emotionally, and those can even impact an individual physically. It's of interest, and my understanding of it is very meager indeed, but what little understanding I have of it, an individual's mental well-being, if it's not optimal, their physical health suffers and their even life expectancy diminishes. And so it's very important that we have a good mental and emotional well-being to help us physically, but all of that, I think, revolves around or orbits around a spiritual well-being that can only be supplied by the Lord. The preacher, if he be Solomon, and I've got that there in kind of the parentheses for you, Solomon may or may not be the author of Ecclesiastes if you missed that part of the class. There's some evidence to suggest that he is. There's some evidence to suggest that he's not. But what he does in this book is really deconstruct the false hope of the godless. In other words, he's going to say, you think you have hope without God? Let's look at that. And today I think this is a very relevant discussion for us to have. And unfortunately, it's hard to have it because many who try to push God away, they don't even have an honest and kind of give and take sort of conversation. They've kind of made up their mind and they're staunch in their opposition, and so they don't want to even listen to us. But let's think about these. And so take your Bible and let's think about first, the memory of the godless will be forgotten. The memory of the godless will be forgotten. Ecclesiastes chapter 1 and verse number 11. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of things that are to come by those who will come after. No one remembers former events. No one remembers these things. And if you think that's not true, just ask JC how tough it is to teach kids history, right, JC? So, it's hard. We do teach history for a purpose, for a reason, so that we might learn from it. Whoever Santayana or whoever first coined the phrase, those who do not learn the lessons of history are doomed to repeat them, and that's a maxim that has been shown to be accurate again and again. And yet here the wise man in the book of Ecclesiastes is saying that what you have to understand is the memory of the godless will be forgotten. We desire to be remembered, yes, but eventually we will be forgotten, no matter how important you think you may be at the moment. Chapter 2, verse 16, for there is no more remembrance of the wise than of the fool forever, since all that now is will be forgotten in the days to come. And how does a wise man die? As the fool. Now again, Ecclesiastes sounds very cynical. It sounds like he's an individual that's depressed and he's down in the dumps and wants to pull you down with him. But what again he's attempting to do is really to highlight and to show you just how futile vanities life is without God. And so keep that in mind. Human achievements and wisdom are erased by death. Record books. If you are a sports fan, you know that when you watch a sporting event, very often there will be some allusion or mention of a record that a certain team has or a certain individual player has. And you've probably watched a sporting event and someone did something spectacular, and the announcers now, because of course they have the benefit of having everything at their fingertips with the computer, and they've got a little guy sitting over here that can look anything up instantaneously. They don't have to go through a catalog like in baseball to try to figure something out. They can say, this is the first time in 40 years that this has happened, or maybe this is the first player ever to do X, Y, and Z. And maybe there's a little remembrance, but do you even know who those people are? Does it really matter? Will your name be in a record book? I don't know, again, depending on what you did for work during your life, or if you're still working, or some sport that you may play. I'll brag a little bit here. I know at least 2 records in baseball at Jackson County High School. Isn't that impressive? Aren't you proud of me for doing that? I played catcher, and so I have the record. We went to White County, Clyde, and I don't know, there was, I guess, a team full of guys that thought they could steal second on me, and so I threw out 7 base runners in one game. I was like, you guys aren't learning your lesson here. Just pop it down to second, tag them out. So I hold that record, and I've already forgotten what the second one was. That tells you how important it is, right? But that's the one I remember. I was number 7, threw out 7 base runners in a game. So what's the point? You're going to be forgotten. The memory especially of the godless will be forgotten. And notice he said, how does a wise man die as the fool? It sounds like he's maybe criticizing the wise man, but what he's trying to do, I believe, is get the fool to think, well, if the wise man dies like me and I die like him and there's nothing to it, well, where do we go? Well, keep going. The legacy of the godless, this is B part, will be forgotten. Similar to the previous point, people try to leave a lasting legacy, but the future is uncertain. Leave a legacy. If you, and I know that you do, because like me, you receive solicitations by email, by telephone call, by regular mail from all sorts of charitable organizations. And I know this is going to sound terrible, if you ever give to one charitable organization, what happens? All of them get your information, right? And so then you get it from everybody. Amy's daddy and mama, I love them dearly. They are charitable to a fault. And especially when we owned and worked at the funeral home, he would give, a donation to this group or whatever. And I mean, we would get a stack of mail. We had one of those, big mail boxes like that, and it would be cram full nearly every morning, with this group and that group saying, send us money for that. We want to leave a legacy. Certainly, there are things that are worth investing in. Amy's brother now, he got out of that business. He works in the I guess it's called planned giving department. I don't know what his job is at Tennessee Tech, but his job is to call people and say, hey, school needs money. Tennessee Tech does that. Fred Hardeman does that. Every school does that. And one of the kind of hooks they try to, throw out there too, you can leave a legacy. People will remember you. Sister Linda, y'all have a scholarship. It's got your name on it. I mean, that's a wonderful legacy. Long after they're gone, Bible majors will be receiving the David and Linda Lipe, scholarship, and they'll be appreciative for it. And so we say, well, there's a legacy I'm going to leave. And there is, but listen to chapter 2. We stopped in verse 16. Keep reading in verse 18 to 23. He said, I hated all my labor in which I had toiled under the sun, because I must leave it to the man who will come after me. That's what's going to happen. Whatever what you have is, whether it's money and liquid assets, or it's property, or it's a farm, or it's a business. And the wise man says, who knows whether he or she, I don't think he's excluding daughters or females here, but those people that I leave what I've worked for in this life to, what will they be? Will they be wise or a fool? Yet he will rule over all my labor in which I have toiled, which I have shown myself wise under the sun. This also is vanity, a I turned my heart and despaired of all the labor in which I had toiled under the sun. For there is a man whose labor is with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, yet he must leave his heritage. The New King James Version uses the word heritage there. I think you could insert the word legacy. He must leave his heritage to a man who has not labored for it. This also is a vanity and a great evil. You know what a trust fund baby is? Some of you have heard that term, a trust fund baby. I knew, and I still know some folks that, they had everything you could ever want, not because they'd worked for it, but because it had been handed to them. Because grandpa or great-grandpa, he was a hard worker, he invested, well in a business or the stock market or whatever, so they had wealth to spare, and it was passed down, so they had anything they wanted. And those people that were given everything without having to work for it were some of the most unsufferable people that you could be around, right? I'm being really critical this morning, aren't I? But those people that think that everything is theirs, but they've not done anything for it. The rest of us are scraping and blood, sweat, and tears to try to just get what little we have. And those people have everything handed to them. That's what the wise man's saying. He said it's a vanity, it's a great evil, and we would tend to concur. What has man for all his labor and for the striving of his heart which he has toiled under the sun? Verse 23, for all his days are sorrowful and his work burdensome. Even in the night his heart takes no rest. This also is vanity. The next generation may very well waste what you've spent your entire life building. Yes?
The reason for everything.
Yeah, and that's really what chapter 3 is about, isn't it? That time sort of deal that we talked about previously. But, it's hard sometimes to discern what that reason is that Clyde mentions. And when everything we've worked for is just evaporated by the foolishness of others, whether we know it or not, again, what are you trying to say? Is he trying to say we shouldn't work hard? Is he trying to say we shouldn't be wise and good stewards of our money and invest and try to grow it or be diligent? No, he's not saying any of that, because the Bible tells us we need to be good stewards. The Bible tells us to work hard. The Bible tells us to be diligent. The Bible tells us to utilize the blessings that God gives us for His purposes. And I know that this congregation has been blessed. Many of you are aware with those who have went on to their reward but left behind financial gifts and otherwise to bless the work of the church here and the work that's done by this congregation in other parts of the world. That's great. And so keep in mind, again, we're not saying any of that is not without benefit entirely, but what he is saying is, boil it down, the legacy of the godless will be forgotten. There's really no hope without God, especially if you're trying to just leave a legacy based on the world's terms. Point number C, the pride of the godless will be humbled. The pride of the godless will be humbled. Listen to chapter 3, beginning in verse 18. I said in my heart concerning the condition of the sons of men, God tests them that they may see that they themselves are like animals. Listen carefully, verse 19 to 21. For what happens to the sons of men also happens to animals. One thing befalls them. As one dies, so dies the other. Surely they all have one breath. Man has no advantage over animals, for all is vanity. All go to one place. All are from the dust, and all return to the dust. Who knows the spirit of the sons of men, which goes upward, and the spirit of the animal, which goes down to the earth? Now pull that out of context, divorce it from the overall message of the book of Ecclesiastes, and that would sound something akin to evolutionary thinking, wouldn't it? Man and animals are the same. Man is just advanced a little farther than other animals. Is that what we should do? Well, of course not. We can't pull it out of the context, but what he's saying again is, without God, without living for God, without understanding the purpose for which God has created us and desires us to live, we're nothing more than the naked ape, to quote one evolutionist. Rejecting God strips away what makes us special as human beings. We are made in the image of God to reflect that image to Him, to be His image bearers to the world. And without that, without living with that purpose in mind, our death is no more significant than an animal's death. That really seems harsh, doesn't it? But he's trying again to make his point and do so in a very vivid fashion. Point number D, the hope of the godless will become horror. Now you might say that sounds a little weird. What do you mean by that? The hope of the godless will become a horror or a fear. Kind of echoes what we started with. I'll give you the verses that help us understand that. Ecclesiastes 9, 4-6. For him who is joined to all the living, there is hope. Okay. For a living dog is better than a dead lion. There's an image for you, right? A living dog is better than a dead lion. I've had a few dogs in my life. Most of them like to chase good years too much to live very long, so that's why we don't have one now. But I've never had a lion for a pet. The closest I've ever got, there's a stuffed lion at Freed Hardeman in the sports center. According to the little plaque that's there, apparently it was terrorizing a village in Africa and eating children, and so they killed it. I mean, kind of gruesome, but that's apparently what was happening. And but this lion is behind the glass there in the trophy case, and all the dogs that I've had, no matter how ferocious they might have been, it's pretty easy to tell they'd be no match for that lion. That lion could just eat them up in a gulp, and that would be all. But the wise man says, a living dog is better than a dead lion. Can a dead lion hurt you? No. That one behind the glass, he can't hurt you. So a living dog is better than that? Well, what does that have to do with me? You have to keep reading verse 5 and 6. The living, us, know that they will die, but the dead know nothing, and they have no more reward, for the memory of them is forgotten. Also their love, their hatred, and their envy is now perished. Nevermore will they have a share in anything done under the sun. The only advantage the living have to the dead is knowing that they will die. And death is terrifying to those without God. As we've said already, we can have through Jesus the fear of death removed. That's what he came to do. But without that is without advantaging or taking advantage in our lives of the death of Jesus and his life on our behalf, then death is only something to be dreaded, to be feared, to be looked at as something to avoid at all costs. And that's what our culture does by and large. And I'm not saying we shouldn't take care of ourselves and eat well and exercise and go to the doctor and, do those things. We should. But as we said at the very outset, for the Christian, there's no fear in death. And we spoke of this, last Sunday morning also. There's no reason to dread. And so the hope of the godless will become a horror, a fear. So, here's point number 4, and I'm just going to kind of reiterate again. Does life have meaning without God? Ecclesiastes, the preacher, says no, it does not. That's a double negative, I'm sorry. The preacher argues that life without God is meaningless. Life without God is, as it were, like being dead. Let me go through these verses kind of rapidly. Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 2. I praise the dead who are already dead more than the living who are still alive. Life without purpose is as empty as being physically dead. The oppressed cry out for help, but without God no one hears them. So life without God is like, as it were, never being born. Listen to verse 3, the same chapter, Ecclesiastes 4. Yet better than both, that is, the dead who are already dead more than the living who are still alive yet going to die, yet better than both is he who has never existed. Now, that's an abstract concept. How can you think of a person who has never existed? Do they exist? No. But again, he's trying to set up an abstract idea. It would be better to never have existed who has not seen the evil work that is done under the sun. If you want a parallel passage that will really make you scratch your head, read Job chapter 3. Job, after he has suffered the loss of everything, one commentator says he invokes a counter-cosmic incantation. A fancy way of saying Job was trying to almost pray and ask God to do some sort of magic trick to go back in time. And he say, may the day be cursed when it was told to my mother, a man-child has been born to her. when she took me on her knees, which is a figurative way of saying when she nursed me in Hebrew language and so forth. Job says, may that day be blotted out. If you watch science fiction movies or read sci-fi books, you know that this is a motif that's been explored a lot. You know, the idea that we can go back in time and, manipulate events so it changes what happens in the future and so forth. And Job was doing that a long time ago. He said, go back in time, and even the night of my conception, he said, erase it all. And he was saying that because I'm suffering so terribly. It would have been better that none of that would have ever happened, because if none of that would have never happened, I would not be here to suffer as I'm now suffering. And here Ecclesiastes 4 verse 3 says, better is he who has never existed than to have all of the suffering and trouble and toil that come with a life lived without God. Achievement without God is still something that leads to emptiness. Now, go to chapter 6. In chapter 6, verses 1 to 6, I've got this in your workbook, and I hope you know I'm not trying to be sensational or trying to be insensitive. Life without God is like an aborted life. I know we hear a lot about abortion. Listen to Ecclesiastes 6, 1 to 6. This is an evil which I've seen under the sun, common among men, a man to whom God has given riches, wealth, honor, so that he lacks nothing for himself of all he desires, yet God does not give him power to eat it, but a foreigner consumes it. This is vanity and evil affliction. If a man begets 100 children and lives many years, so that the days of his years are many, but his soul is not satisfied with goodness, or indeed he has no burial, I say that a stillborn child is better than he. We might use the word abortion there. For it comes in vanity and parts in darkness. Its name is covered with darkness. Though it has not seen the sun or known anything, this has more rest than that man, even if he lives 1,000 years twice. But has not seen goodness. Do not all go to one place. If life lacks meaning, and it does without God, and living life then without God would make a person equivalent or even inferior to a stillborn child, a child aborted, because at least that child did not go through all of the suffering and all of the frustrations that this life has, especially, again, to those exclusively who try to live without the Lord. You may gain wealth and honor and still feel unfulfilled. You may acquire great possessions and prestige, but at the end of the day, he said, you might get 100 children, might live 1,000 years twice. What difference will it make? This is serious stuff. This is weighty. What's the solution? We find life in God. God brings true life, true meaning, true purpose in that life. And Ecclesiastes teaches the same message that Jesus was the fulfillment of. I'm thankful. We have the benefit. I want you, and I know this is challenging. I'm not saying that I can even do this, I think, to the degree that maybe it would merit. Try to imagine, if you can, imagine reading Ecclesiastes and not knowing anything about Jesus. Can you try to do that? You're living in the Old Testament time period. You know that God has promised a Messiah or a Savior, but He's not here yet, and you're just reading Ecclesiastes without any knowledge of what Jesus has done. It'd be a tough read. It's a tough read now for us to read it, knowing what Jesus has done, knowing what Jesus gives and offers. But how much more challenging would it have been to read it without that? Now, of course, the book ends by saying, fear God and keep His commandments. That's the whole duty of men. We know we do that because of what Jesus has done, but it would have been very challenging, I think, and quite a formidable task for them to have done that without knowing what Jesus has done on their behalf. I'll leave you some discussion questions. How important is hope? It's essential. I was in a hospice facility, I forget even where it was, during my funeral home working days, and there was a little framed piece of art on the wall, and I should have taken a picture of it, but it said something to the effect of, a person can live, 3 days without water. A person can live, I forget the number of days. It really surprised me. It was over a week of time without food. A person can go through, all of these things for a certain period of time without whatever the substance was. But then at the bottom, the kind of big print was, but a person cannot even go one moment without hope. And I thought that was a very powerful idea, especially given, where it was located in a hospice facility, and those that are there, to live without hope. That's a very frightening thing indeed. Does the message of Ecclesiastes on hope match the New Testament? Yes, in the sense of, again, without God, there is no hope. What is a legacy? Do you feel compelled to leave your mark on the world? We should want to leave our mark as faithful servants of the Lord. I love what the Bible says about, I want to say it's even in the New Testament. I should have looked this up. Talking about David, it said he served the Lord during his generation. And I think it said also about other Bible characters. They served the Lord in their generation, and they've made a difference. That's what we want to do, and we want to leave that legacy behind for our children, grandchildren, for others that knew and loved us. They served the Lord in their generation, and they showed us the way to get to heaven, and we're going to follow them. Is it possible to leave a permanent legacy? If so, how? Again, that's just for living, by living for the Lord. No other way can it be done. Why do people fear death? My idea is, again, that uncertainty that's involved in it. And maybe there are people who really know. I've talked to some people, surprisingly enough, who say, I know what's waiting for me when it's over. And some of them are so obstinate. I'll say, well, but it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be. It's not humorous, even though he wanted us to tell it as a humor. One gentleman came in and he made his funeral arrangements with us. He said, whatever you do, he said, don't let them cremate me. He said, I know I'm going to burn once. I don't want to burn twice. And I said, you don't have to burn once either. He said, yeah, I'm going to. I said, you don't have to. He said, yeah, the way I've lived, I have. I said, no, because of Jesus now, but I'm going to. And to my knowledge, he never made any effort to serve the Lord. So I'm going to burn once, don't want to burn twice. Well, burning once isn't a good option either in that regard. And then we've already looked at the ways the preacher describes the meaninglessness of life without God. Well, next week, like I said, Brother Powell will be here for our gospel meeting. We'll look forward to that very much. But if you need a workbook and don't have one, just tell me or shoot me an email, call Sonia, and we'll print those and have those ready for you in a couple of weeks. Thank you for your good attention and study in class this morning.